this is a standard talk I give about natural history of the moths of the Finger Lakes, and every year I spice it up a bit, add new science in, take old bits out, and modify it. So for those of you that have seen this talk before, some will be old news to you, some will be new news, and then I've changed it a bit at the end, as you'll find out. So basically, click here. Here's how we're going to do this presentation. We're going to start with what is a moth, just so we're all on the exact same page. We're going to cover the 4 F's of insect behavior: feeding, fleeing, fighting, and reproduction. Then we're going to talk about why should we care about moths? Why are they important in the environment? And then I'll give you advice on how you too can find moths. And there's some very simple things you can do, and how you can increase the population and diversity of moths in your own backyard. And the very last thing I'll talk about at the end, if you've spent any time in the Finger Lakes this summer, there is one moth in particular you may be cursing the existence of. We will talk about that, and we'll talk about why I'm not giving it a name at this point. All right, so let's talk about what is a moth. So moths are insects of the order Lepidoptera. Lepidoptera, literally translated, means scaly winged. And being an insect, they have 3 main body parts: the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. So back to Lepidoptera, scaly winged. This is what a moth's wing looks like up close. This is a close-up spruce budworm. And if you look at the wings here, what you'll see are what looks like shingles on a roof. They're overlapping. They're deciduous. They rub off if you touch them. And despite what you might have heard, if you rub these scales off of a moth or a butterfly, they still can fly. They just lose a lot of the coloration. This is what gives them a lot of color. And it's not just on the wings. The scales cover the body, the legs, the antennae, the head. Everything is covered in scales, basically. If you rub all the scales off a moth, you're left with something with transparent wings, a shiny brown body with shiny legs, etc. Let's start with the head. So the first main body part, the head. In moths, you'll see these great big compound eyes made up of many tiny lenses. The bigger the eyes, the more the lenses, and the better the vision they have overall. Essentially, the more pixels they have in their vision. There's sometimes additional eyes called ocelli, which would be up here, where they aren't in this one. And you'll notice the antennae up in front. The antennae they use to taste and smell the environment around them. And you'll notice in this moth in particular, you see this coiled proboscis right underneath or in front and underneath the eyes. So that at rest is coiled up and tucked in. When they want to feed, that unfurls out, and they use that to drink fluids. So basically think of it as a coiled straw. Not all moths have a proboscis. There's a bunch where as an adult, they don't feed at all. So you'll just see basically an empty face where they don't have functioning mouth parts. Behind the head, we've got the thorax. This is the middle part of the insect. And think of it as a big box of muscles. It's the hard part of the insect. So on this plume moth, you'll see that it's got the wings coming off the side of the thorax and the legs as well. And insects have 6 legs as an adult. And following that, we have the abdomen. And I used an actual wingless moth to illustrate this. This is a fall cankerworm female, and it essentially has no wings, just little tiny nubbies up here. But you'll see the bulk of it is abdomen. And in moths, the abdomen is typically the biggest part of it, especially in females. And that contains the guts and the genitalia. And on the topic of genitalia, if you talk about, or talk to anyone that's really serious about moth identification, we will talk your ear off about moth genitalia. And here's why. This is moth genitalia. On the left, we have a female. On the right, we have a male. And it's not just that we're perverts, it's that they are crazy complicated structures, way more complicated than our primitive genitalia. We are so simple compared to moths. And so basically, I won't go into great detail here, but the female has multiple openings. Sperm transfer happens inside the body in most of them. A lot of crazy complex structures. Here's a male on the right, and just all kinds of grabby and hooky bits used to grab onto the end of the female, work into the female. There's all kinds of things going on there. In most cases, we just don't understand what's going on. That's all I'll say about moth genitalia for now. Now, all those characters I mentioned apply to the adult stage. And moths and butterflies, Lepidoptera, go through a four-parted life cycle called complete metamorphosis. It starts out with the egg stage, and I'm going to use the forest tent caterpillar to illustrate this. So here's the egg mass of a forest tent caterpillar. This you'll find on twigs throughout the winter. It's a little frothy mass. There's probably a few hundred eggs in this mass. In the spring, these eggs hatch into a caterpillar. Here's the caterpillar, the forest tent caterpillar, and it feeds on various plants. And the caterpillar is the feeding stage of the insect. So basically, it's eating and growing and eating and growing. Every time it grows, it sheds its skin. And it eats a lot. And I'm terrible with numbers, so I always have to write this down here, but I just want to read a little bit here about the world record holder for the animal that eats the most. It's actually one of our local moths, not this species, the Polyphemus moth. And I'll talk about Polyphemus a bit later. The Polyphemus moth eats 86,000 times its own birth weight in food in 2 months. Now, I don't know about you, but my brain does not comprehend really big numbers. So trying to break this down, I made a comparison with a human baby. So assuming a 137-ounce baby, that would take it would basically eat 334 tons of food in 2 months. Again, more big numbers. So to make it simple, that same baby, every hour, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 2 months, would have to eat 2,045 baby food jars worth of food just to eat as much as a caterpillar does. So it's the amount of biomass they're churning through is impressive. Now, the caterpillar eats and grows and eats and grows, and eventually it turns into what's called the pupa stage. And so what we've got here, the pupa is inside the cocoon. The cocoon is a silk protection around it. And inside the dense center part here, you'll see a shiny brown pupa. And it's sort of intermediate between the larva and the adult. Inside the pupa, old caterpillar body parts are being broken down, new adult body parts are being developed, and eventually the adult emerges. And here's an adult male forest tent caterpillar. Now, the adult stage does not grow. It's sort of the end game. They're there to mate and lay eggs, and that's it. And it's often the shortest part of the life cycle. So if you ever see a small moth, it will never grow into a bigger moth. If they get damaged, they do not regenerate things. It's the caterpillar that does the growing. The adult is the end stage. Okay, so all the characters I've talked about so far apply to both butterflies and moths in the Lepidoptera. So question is, what's the difference? Short answer is there's no difference. They are essentially the same thing. Butterflies are one lineage right within the moths. They're very closely related. And in a lot of places of the world, it's nearly impossible to separate them. In fact, I have a lot of trouble. Locally, we can, and I'll show you how to do it. So on this crescent, the key character is the antenna. So if you look at the tip of the antennae, there's a knob right at the very end. That's the club. If it's got a club just at the end of the antenna, it's a butterfly. Also, that's the surefire way. If it's holding, also a lot of butterflies will hold their wings up over their back at rest, but some don't. Our butterflies typically fly during the day, but not always, and are often colorful, but to be honest, there's actually more species of colorful moths than there are colorful butterflies. And by diversity, the moths outnumber butterflies about 20 to 1 here. Now, moths, basically, their antennae are different. So if we look at the Cecropia moth in the center here, it's got this feathery antenna, which has a very large surface area. And this is a male. I'd be using that to pick up a female by scent. More about that later. Some moths do have a club in the antenna. If you look at the top left, that's the front end of a hummingbird clearwing, but it's got a really elongate club that takes up about half the antenna, or just a straight filiform antenna, which is the fancy term for it, just a straight antenna with no ornamentation, which you see in the bottom left on this cutworm moth. Moths often rest with their wings tight over their back or flat over them. Sometimes they don't. And moths can fly during the day or night or both, depending on the species. Now, I'm sure the vast majority of you don't think this, but if you're talking to less refined people, less interested in nature, and you talk about moths and that you're a moth person, you study moths, you're like, oh, my clothing, they're terrible, they eat my clothing. Well, yeah, closed moths do exist, but they are by far the minority of species. This is a clothes moth right here that I pictured. And this is the very first clothes moth I ever saw in my life. As a child, I would keep all the ugly sweaters I got at Christmas time and pile them in a corner, hoping to get a clothes moth. And it took me 8 years to get my first one. It took me moving to university to a dirty frat house and finally getting my first clothes moth. And this is me capturing it here. So they do exist, but the vast majority do not feed on that. But this one is an interesting group in that some of its members feed on weird things. There's one that live in ant nests, feeding on debris. There's even some that live inside owl pellets or dead carcasses and things like that. The vast majority, though, of moth larvae feed on plants. So about 95% of them. And some of them have some pretty interesting ways of feeding on them and are well concealed. So for instance, sometimes you'll see swellings on goldenrods. If it's a nice round ball, it's caused by a fly. But if it's more spindle shaped, like in this example, that's caused by one of 2 different species of moths. And here's one of them. This is the goldenrod gall Noramoshima. And here it is inside there. So I've cut this open. And basically what happens is the female lays an egg on the plant. The egg hatches, the caterpillar secretes a chemical from within the plant that basically triggers the plant to kind of have an allergic reaction and grow around it. So it creates this chamber for the caterpillar to live inside. And there's all kinds of different gall makers that you see out there. Some of them have much more simple structures. This is a moth that's very common here in the springtime as a caterpillar on spring ephemeral wallflowers or sugar maple seedlings on forest floor, basically anything low down. It's one of the moths I work on, Clepsis melaleucana, the bold patched Clepsis. And what this one does is you can see it's feeding on this red trillium here. And it took one of the sepals and rolled it up and silked it together into a tube that it lives in. And that tube sort of extends off screen here. And what I've done is I've poked its backside in the tube and it's come out to say hi and see what's going on. But basically it would do most of its feeding at night outside of the tube. Some make cases they carry with them. This is a birch case bearer. So what's going on here is there's a tiny caterpillar that cut the part of the edge of the birch leaf and sewed it together to make this like little case right here. And here's the caterpillar's body. Edie, can you see my cursor?
I can, yep.
Okay, good. So basically you've got the body here. Here's the head. And what it's done is cut a little hole into the leaf and burrowed into the leaf between the upper and lower layer of the leaf. And it's feeding entirely inside the leaf while still hanging out inside that case. And as it grows, it sometimes will make a bigger case or add to it. But basically it's protected from the elements and a lot of predators. There's a lot of moths that take this a step further, what we call leaf miners. So what's happened here, this is a sugar maple leaf. And this little blemish at the end here is where the female laid an egg. It punctured into the leaf. The egg hatched to a tiny little caterpillar that again feeds in between the upper and lower layer of the leaf, eating basically the middle of the sandwich out. And you got these little caterpillar poops here all on the side, called frass. That's the technical term for caterpillar poop on the sides here. And here's the caterpillar itself. It's a very flat caterpillar and basically munches its way inside the leaf. And they're not just terrestrial. Most of our caterpillars are terrestrial, but there's a few that are aquatic. There's some that graze algae off of rocks. And here's another easy one to find. If you've got a pond with water lilies in it, and you notice that the water lilies have been cut and then folded underneath water, typically there's a caterpillar like this inside here. So this is a pondweed moth. The caterpillar has these crazy long gills at the side of the body, and it lives in that shelter it makes out of the leaf. And because they're often in stagnant ponds with not a lot of oxygen, what they do is they actually undulate their body inside that shelter, which forces water through and keeps moving oxygenated water past them to help them breathe. Now, I mentioned most caterpillars feed on plants. There are some weird exceptions. I mentioned some of them. Here's another one. This is called the masked caterpillar, and it's a fungus feeder. And it's not that picky. I'd find them on fleshy fungi like this one. I've seen them in moldy acorns before. So basically, any sort of fungal product, they will try their best to eat. And it's not just the larva that feeds. So again, the larva does the bulk, if not all of the feeding in moths. But some of the adults do visit flowers, both during the day or night. This is a spotted thyrus. You'll get this. This is on a blackberry flower. But just look around. You'll see lots of tiny moths visiting flowers. But if you want to see a lot more, go out at night. especially in a few weeks, once the goldenrods start blooming, then you'll see lots of stuff. Go out with a headlamp and you'll see moths all over the flowers visiting them. But it's not just flowers that they're feeding on. You'll often get moths and butterflies as well visiting fecal matter and mud puddles. So what are they doing there? Well, it's typically the males that go to these sources. So here are some large aspen tortrix on some wolf scat. And so what they're after is salts. So the males, in order to mate with a female, in some species, the female can actually tell how salty his sperm package is, spermatophore. And basically the salt is needed for proper egg production. So the saltier the male, the more nutritious the egg batch and the happier the female is. So these males go to these sources of salt and will drink from it. And some do some pretty impressive things. This is a moth called the Common Glophisia, and it's slightly bigger than my thumbnail, so not a big moth, and admittedly not very impressive looking. But what it does is really impressive. There was some research done here at Cornell a number of years back, and basically, this moth visits mud puddles. It feeds on trembling aspen as a larva, which is pretty low in sodium. The moth sits on the edge of the puddle, and then it drinks. Now, the first impressive thing it does is it passes water from snout to vent in about a minute or two. So that's really impressive, first of all. And it can actually absorb most of the sodium that goes through it. Okay, fantastic. But it's passing a lot of water through. But if you're that small, sitting on the edge of a puddle, and you have to pee, your pee is going to pollute your own puddle. So how do you deal with that? Well, this moth can pee farther than I can. And here's a lovely picture of that by the research done here at Cornell. And basically, they can shoot it about 1 meter to 1.5 meters away. So it's truly mind-blowing. So we've talked about what moths feed on. Let's talk about the gazillion different ways that they can die. Basically, the world's out there to get them. Weather is the first thing I'll mention. Adverse weather, especially when caterpillars are really young, can sometimes kill off 95, even 99% of a population. So this caterpillar in particular, I photographed this on Christmas Day a number of years ago. And what had happened is we had a bout of freezing rain, which knocked all these winter active caterpillars out of the trees. Now, if we get a freeze after that, a lot of these caterpillars are doomed. They're not going to make it back up to the tree. If it's warm, they might be able to. So adverse events like that can be really detrimental to their populations. But even things like if the spring is too early or late, because a lot of moths time the egg hatching with bud break. And if they're too early, the caterpillars hatch and there's no food, or if they're too late, the leaves have grown too much and are too tough to eat. So you can actually lose a lot of the population that way. There's also lots of different pathogens out there that will kill caterpillars and even adult moths. So there's all kinds of different bacteria and viruses, especially when you have high densities of certain species. Those pathogens can just wipe through a population and knock their numbers way back. And then fungi, especially in wet years like this year. This is a great year to take a walk in the woods and look for various types of insects that are plastered to vegetation where they've been taken over by fungus. Here's 2 examples. On the left, I've got a garden tiger caterpillar, and that cotton candy looking fluff coming out of its body is fungal spores just bursting out of its body, drifting in the wind to be accidentally eaten by another caterpillar. On the right, that's a Donacula moth. It's another aquatic species, and it doesn't look too impressive, but this is not how they normally behave. So this fungus has basically convinced the moth to climb up high up on a plant and just die there and hang on. And it's not just even hanging on. The fungi have grown out of it and basically glued it to that plant. And over time, you'll see the fungus sort of spread out of it and then spread fungal spores through the air. Now, it's not just fungi and pathogens. There's also a lot of different insects that are what we call parasitoids. Now, a parasitoid is different than a parasite. A parasite is something that takes food from a host and then leaves without typically killing the host. So a good example is a mosquito is a parasite. Takes their blood and leaves. A parasitoid's different. Like this princess wasp, it will actually feed a bit on the host and then kill it in the end. So pretty key difference there. So with this particular one, this one's called Ultronia, and it's a specialist in spiny caterpillars. So what it does, here's the female, And at the very end, you'll see there's a great big spike here. It's called the ovipositor, the egg-laying tube. It finds a spiny caterpillar, jabs it with that ovipositor, and injects an egg. Now, in some species, they also will inject a virus that they cleave from their own DNA, and that virus knocks down the immune system of the host so that that egg can hatch into a little wasp grub. The next thing it does is really quite interesting, because what it does is it doesn't want to kill the host right away. It wants to keep fresh meat around at all times. So it's going to hit all the non-vital organs. It's going to hit things like fat bodies and try to get all of the nutrition that it can. And then once it's done its development, it doesn't need the host anymore, it kills it. And in some, it does some pretty interesting behavior. So here is a forage looper that has been parasitized by a princess wasp like the previous one, also called ichneumon wasp. And so the wasp grub was inside here, hitting the non-vital organs, keeping it alive, and then it emerged and spun this cocoon. And there is something that the wasp grub does to mess with the brain of this caterpillar. It stops feeding, and its only goal until its dying day is to defend this cocoon. If anything comes to attack that cocoon, the caterpillar will thrash and bite whatever comes to it. So basically defends its killer. Now, some do some pretty impressive things. There's a group of wasps called braconids, and a lot of braconids are what we call polyembryonic. Let me explain what's going on in these pictures. So first of all, in the top picture in the middle, that's what a typical braconid looks like. They're usually smaller than princess wasps, often not noticeable. But what's neat is some of these will land on a caterpillar, like on the left here. This is a hornworm, and a female would have jabbed it and injected a single egg. And in some of these species, it's what we call a polyembryonic egg. So the egg hatches into a whole bunch of larvae that then just fan out and again hit the non-vital organs and keep it alive as long as possible. If you want to see some amazing cinematography, there's some beautiful videos of this online of the larvae inside the caterpillar. So nothing will be noticeable on the outside at this point until the wasp larvae are done feeding. Then they burrow out and they spin these cocoons to protect themselves. So this horntail caterpillar has all these cocoons where the wasp grubs have emerged and they're pupating inside there, and eventually a whole bunch of braconid wasps will emerge. In other ones, they basically turn into Swiss cheese. Here's a cutworm caterpillar that I took very extreme care to photograph because I thought it was alive and I didn't want to disturb it. Turns out it was just the hulk of a Swiss cheese caterpillar, where again, probably another polyembryonic braconid that went through here and just ate its way out. There's a lot of different flies that are parasitoids on caterpillars as well. One group in particular is the Tikkinid flies. They typically look kind of like a housefly, but usually a little more bristly, like in this example here. And what they do is they land on a caterpillar, and they typically will lay eggs right on the surface, right behind the head. Reason being is that if they lay it near the butt end of the caterpillar, it instinctively knows to bend back and destroy those eggs. And here's what it looks like. So here's another cutworm caterpillar, and it's got two Tikkinid eggs right at the front of the head here. These eggs are going to hatch into a little maggot that will burrow in and do similar things, just like the princess wasps that we talked about. Now, it's not just parasitoids. There's a lot of different predators out there. And some of the most important predators might surprise you. Things like yellow jacket wasps. There's been studies that suggest that most caterpillar defenses are against yellow jacket wasps. They're that important. Carpenter ants are another thing. So here's a New York carpenter ant. And it has mangled this pug caterpillar. So here's the head of the caterpillar. Here's the butt end of it. A very common caterpillar you get on various flowers. And carpenter ants, despite their notoriousness for boring in wood and causing damage to structures, they're primarily insect feeders. So they're very efficient, especially caterpillar hunters. And of course, vertebrates are important too. Not as important as insects, but they do feed on a lot of different caterpillars. In fact, a lot of our birds, like these red-eyed vireos, the adults migrate every year from northern South America up to here, which is a dangerous journey just for the abundant caterpillars. So obviously, we have an important food resource here for a lot of different animals. That's not just that. Things like shrews and mice can have effects on populations, and even things like bears can depend on caterpillars for food. Now, when I talk about caterpillars feeding on plants, Those that will garden will often think, oh no, my poor plants are being attacked by caterpillars. Well, you know what? Plants are not defenseless. Plants are fighting back. The only time they're really defenseless is when we breed them to produce really big fruits and tubers and breed the defenses out of them. Wild plants, though, tend to have a really good go at it. And so they're producing a lot of different chemicals. And I stole this slide from a different lecture I give. And I don't want you to read this. I just want to point out a few things here, that some of the chemicals that we actually use are potent insecticides, like caffeine. Caffeine that a lot of us enjoy, that is an insecticide. That's what it's there for. Things like saponins, which are basically soaps that destroy cell membranes. Various glycosides will break down to sugar and cyanide. So things like common milkweed has cardiac glycosides in it, so you have to be specially adapted to eat it. Terpenoids, some of them mimic hormones that are very important in insect development, so they don't develop properly. Certain ones are neurotoxins like pyrethrins. You've got toxic amino acids, where basically the insect thinks it's got a regular amino acid, tries to build a protein with it, and it doesn't fold right, so you have a non-functional protein. And then proteinases. This is another important one. So if you eat lots of really fresh pineapple or papaya, you might notice your mouth feels a little raw. That's because they've got proteinases in them, meat tenderizer basically, which breaks down proteins. So they're another plant defense. Calcium oxalate, this is a physical defense, and you'll find it in things like Jack in the Pulpit and water arum. If you eat those plants, you'll ingest the calcium oxalate, which in itself is not generally that toxic, but the form you ingest it in are these long crystal, needle-like crystals. And they stay intact, and basically they shred your gut lining. So you're going to have a very bloody stool after eating that. And that goes for insects that eat it as well. And then oils will interfere with bacterial rumination. And that's very important in a lot of insects. We're just really discovering how important that is in a lot of these. And the thing is, the key thing to remember with these plant toxins is poison is in the dose. All these plants have some level of toxin in it. And for these insects, basically what they have to do is produce something called a mixed function oxidase, which is a chemical that counteracts that chemical, which takes extra energy. So just because a plant's toxic doesn't mean a caterpillar can't eat it. It just means it takes energy to eat it. And sometimes the balance isn't in its favor, so it's got to switch plants, and some can do that. Some of these plants will beef up their defenses when they're under attack. And some plants will actually produce volatile chemicals while they're under attack that then drift through the air and are picked up by neighboring plants. So they know that their neighbors, saying, hey, I'm under attack here. That plant now knows to beef up its defenses because there might be something coming to eat it too. And some of these, what are called pheromones, these volatile chemicals, will actually attract predators and parasites as well to feed on them. Now, there's lots of ways that caterpillars can defend themselves as well. So one of the prime ones, you've probably all seen this, when you disturb a caterpillar off of a plant, it drops down, and it drops down on this silken strand. And the silk itself is pretty amazing. It's not strong like spider silk necessarily, but it belongs to a bunch of cells associated with the salivary glands, and they are some of the most mitochondrially active cells known in animals. So they are really rapidly producing proteins. And in caterpillars, it's two particular ones called fibroin and sericin. Combined, they create that very fast silk. Now, why is this important? Well, if you're a caterpillar living in the canopy of a tree and you get disturbed and drop down, if you hit the forest floor, that's a long way back up. You might not make it. Your chances of being eaten are great. Your chances of just not having the energy to make it back up are great. So it's a very important defense for caterpillars. Now, of course, camouflage. And I can show you hundreds of pictures of beautiful camouflage in moths. We all know exactly how that works. So I'm just going to show a few here. But the key thing with camouflage is you're only camouflage if you look like what you're camouflaged as. And that sounds intuitive, but basically what I mean by that is if you look like a twig, like this inchworm, you got to act like a twig, and that means not moving. So if you're depending on camouflage, typically during the day, you're sitting still and doing nothing but sitting still. You feed at night. So now you're sort of limited to feeding only, first of all, at a colder time. So things are moving, so you're moving slower since you're cold-blooded, but also you have fewer hours a day where you can actually feed. Now, some take their camouflage to another level. Right now, if you go in your backyard and you've got some flea banes, look for flea banes where the ray flowers, you see them here, are clipped off by a caterpillar. And what you'll find is this caterpillar. This is the camouflage looper, one of the emeralds. And I think the head is right there and the tail's there. It's hard to tell, but basically what it's done is it's clipped off the ray flowers, stuck it to its back as a walking pile of trash. So it's actually really well camouflaged until you know exactly how to find them. What's really neat is if you find them on a fresh flower and just clip them, the flower parts are still the same bright colors. So sometimes get pink ones or blue ones or red ones. It's really quite striking. And the camouflage is, of course, not restricted to just the larvae, but also the adults in a lot of cases. And some camouflage themselves as bird poop, and you can imagine why. Some take it to extremes. This is a bird poop Antiotricha. We have two species here locally, and what's neat is they look like freshly made glistening bird poop. They have this sort of shininess to them. They sit nice and still, usually right on a leaf. This pair happened to be mating when I shot them, but typically they look like bird poop. And so when you're a moth person and you're looking for moths out in nature, you look at a lot of bird poop and are disappointed by the ones that really are bird poop. Now, some are clearly not camouflaged. So here's an example. This is a painted lichen moth in the center here. It is a toxic moth. It would not be enjoyable to eat, and it advertises that. And it reinforces this by looking very similar to the pattern of fireflies. On the top right is a firefly type of beetle, which is also toxic. So they're reinforcing by mimicking each other. This color pattern means don't eat. I'm not enjoyable. And some pretend to be dangerous. These are both moths here, both what we call clearing moths, and they look like wasps, but especially act like wasps. In flight, I've embarrassingly been fooled by these while doing public programs, where there's one instance in particular 2 years ago where I even told the person the genus of wasp that was flying next to me, and they said, I think that's a moth. They were right. It was actually a moth acting like a wasp, but they visit flowers. They're mostly diurnal, so they're mostly out during the day. And I challenge you to identify them in flight as a moth, because I certainly can't do it. Now, other ones have things like eye spots. Here's the Polyphemus moth. This is the one that I mentioned earlier that has the world record for the most amount of food an animal can eat. So Polyphemus moth has these big eye spots. Now, to you or me, we know those are fake eyes, and it's nothing intimidating. But this is a big moth. This moth is, about this big across. So pretty big moth. Picture yourself a small warbler. You're smaller than that. And you have these giant eyes suddenly staring back at you, and they also will shake them to make it look extra intimidating. And obviously it works, or they wouldn't be here. Now, some small moths, the moths I mostly work on, have their own eye spots. And if you look at this pondweed moth, you'll see it doesn't look like eye spots to you or me necessarily, but what's neat is they're a very effective defense against a certain type of animal that has eyes that look like that. And that's jumping spiders. Jumping spiders are very important predators of adult moths. And if you look carefully at the eye arrangements, they do kind of match the eye arrangements there. And then you typically get these sort of leggy looking patterns, and they will sort of walk like this and mimic that. And some even will mimic the threat display of jumping spiders. And there's been studies that show that jumping spiders will back off of them and be sort of scared by them. So it's a very common defense you'll see in a lot of tiny micromoths. And eye spots aren't just there to intimidate. Sometimes when you get smaller eye spots on the edge of the wing, like in the Cecropia moth, it is there to distract. So basically, when you're a predator, you want a quick kill. You don't want a moth flapping around while you're trying to eat it. You want to dispatch it right away. So what this does is it has a fake head up here. So it's got its eye. So if you're a predator, you're coming at this quick, you're going to go for the head. Well, that's actually not the head. And you'll sometimes see beak marks where birds have bitten at the fake head and taken out the wrong end of the insect. And that will sometimes afford it a chance to get away. Now, some do what's called a startle response, and this is done by a group called the Underwings. This is a species that's flying right now. I get them in my backyard down near Ithaca, and this is called the Ultronia Underwing. Now, it's pretty well camouflaged. This one, though, obviously we can see because I've zoomed right in on it. Some have really impressive camouflage, and they depend on startling predators if they're discovered. So if a bird sees this and realizes, oh, that's not bark, that's edible, this moth, first of all, will flash its hind wings, so you can see it's got red and black patterns, and fly off. So first of all, there's that startle of sudden color. That will buy that moth a split second of time where the predator sort of goes, oh, wow, that's wrong. But then predators aren't necessarily stupid. They realize, oh, it's moving, that's food. Now its brain has locked in on this red and black pattern that's zipping along. And so they're chasing it. Then all this moth has to do is fly around a tree, fold up its wings, and disappear again because the red and black thing is gone. And obviously, it's a very effective defensive strategy. Now, some of these can defend themselves chemically as well. This is called a Pus Caterpillar. You'll find these on small willow shrubs occasionally. And so what's happened with this one is normally it's got its tail end resting flat against the plant, but just before I took this photo, I poked it in the head because, hey, why not poke caterpillars in the head, see what they do. And it swung these spiky tails with this gooey tentacle, which actually extends out quite a bit further to about here, and whacked my finger with it. Now, I haven't tasted this species, but I did smell the gooey tentacles, and they're pretty stinky and probably even worse tasting. But some actually have some pretty nasty chemicals they produce. This is called a lace-capped caterpillar. And first of all, I want to point out the amazing camouflage on this. It's basically will eat the edge of an oak leaf and then look like a fake point of an oak leaf. In the fall, oak leaves typically have this little blemish on the tips. And look at these little blemishes it gets here that match this nicely. Color scheme's all right. It's just amazing camouflage. But if that camouflage fails and a bird decides to eat this, well, this hump, this whole segment of the body is taken up almost entirely by this gigantic gland that secretes formic acid. So if you pop this in your mouth, it's going to unload that formic acid in your mouth and you're not going to enjoy yourself. And some produce chemicals even as adults. This is a virgin tiger moth. This species is flying right now, actually. And this is another one that I poked for whatever reason. And what I noticed is when you poke it, there's a little gland and the prothorax, the front of the thorax, that secretes toxic alkaloids and it bubbles out. Again, another chemical that probably tastes worse than it smells. It didn't smell great, but it probably tastes a lot worse. And I haven't had the courage yet to try one. And some are downright venomous. This is a spiny oak slug. These are pretty common here, not just in oaks. They feed in a variety of deciduous trees. And these spines actually will inject venom. Now, will this kill you? Well, unless you're allergic, you're fine. But it will feel like a bee sting. It's not pleasant. There are some caterpillars in the tropics, though, that can be fatal if you do handle them. So in the tropics, you don't mess around with caterpillars. Up here, unless you're allergic, you're fine. And even hairy caterpillars. Hairy caterpillars are actually well defended. Now, this is a hickory tussock moth. For most people, unless you're really sensitive to them, you can safely and carefully, if you handle this carefully. So you can have one walk across you. I can safely handle them. I can even rough them up a little bit and I have no ill effects. That's a different story though if you put it in your mouth, because those hairs, as soft and fluffy as they look, are actually barbed and typically break off when they get embedded into your skin. And they love soft, fleshy skin. So like your gut lining, your mouth and whatnot. So if you eat this, you're going to get a lot of irritation on the way down and you will not eat another one. And so hairy caterpillars are actually quite well defended. Now, for other animals to eat this, especially birds, there are some strategies that can be employed. So a common strategy in two species in particular, the black-billed and yellow-billed cuckoo, what they do is, first of all, you'll notice they build up big numbers whenever there's an outbreak of hairy caterpillars because they specialize in them. And what they do is they just swallow the caterpillar as is. And then every few days, they shed their entire gut lining and sort of vomit it up as a little ball and discard it and grow a new gut lining. So it's truly amazing. Obviously, the strategy works. Sounds wasteful, but hey, hairy caterpillars are a valuable resource and not much is going for it. Other birds, things like crows and ravens, if they're really desperate, what they'll do is they'll take a caterpillar and whack it on a branch over and over and over and over again, knock as many hairs off as possible until they can kind of eat it. Not an ideal situation for either the caterpillar or the bird. And then I just read about something that surprised me this year. Apparently there's some orioles that have learned for some of these hairy caterpillars that what they do is they step on the caterpillar and squish the guts out and eat the guts and leave the outside of the caterpillar. I'd love to see that someday. I have trouble believing it, but I've seen it reported. Now, they also have some defenses against some of the parasitoids. Now, one of the common ways that parasitoids find a caterpillar is that they find the caterpillar poop. So if you find a pile of caterpillar poop, instinctively the wasp knows, fly up, that's where the caterpillar is. Well, this caterpillar has a defense against that. This is a warty birch caterpillar. And at the very end, so the head end is here on the right, there's the tail end. And what it does is at the very tail end, it's got what's called an anal tubercle. And when it's ready to poop, it passes the poop to the anal tubercle. It sort of locks up like this and then flings the poop far, far away. And it flings them off in all different directions. So it doesn't leave a telltale sign of poop for the wasps to find. And here's another example. And some birds have, and some mammals have clued in that if you see a plant that's been eaten, there's probably a caterpillar nearby, and that's an efficient way to find them. Well, some caterpillars avoid this problem by eating at night in one part of the plant and then going elsewhere during the day. And here's a prime example of it. This is the caterpillar of a white underwing. The head's down here. Here's the tail end of it. And I like this photo for several reasons. Initially, I hated it because I couldn't get the color or the lighting right. But that's the point. Camouflage is often dependent on the situation that you're in. So if you look right here, this dappled light, which is the habitat of this, typically young aspen and birch forests, is its surroundings. So it breaks up the outline of it. And so some parts of it are bright, some parts of it are dark. And if I wasn't zoomed in on this, you wouldn't see it. In fact, the only reason I saw this caterpillar is I was going through dense brush and I almost grabbed it with my hand. And before I grabbed it, I saw it. I went, wow, I need a picture of this. And some caterpillars have a really neat strategy. Some of the inchworms, to avoid leaving signs of where they've fed, will actually hide their evidence. So this is a sugar maple leaf. This is not how a sugar maple leaf usually looks. So what it's done is it's eaten a nice even ring around it, so it looks just like a round leaf. Some take it even a step further. Here's another one. These are two maple leaves, and what you can see is it ate the middle of the furrow out. And it's almost symmetrical. It's amazing. Here's something that's got fewer neurons than my pinky finger, and it can do that. It just blows my mind. And once you know to look for this, it's surprisingly common. Now, some caterpillars will have defenses even after they've been attacked. This is a tiger moth, and basically what they can do is essentially chemotherapy. So in some tiger moths, if they have a Tikkinid fly that's laid eggs on it, those eggs hatch into the maggot, and they have a maggot inside their body, well, they're doomed. Except with this caterpillar, it will switch from eating a nutritious plant to something that's really poisonous. So they'll move around, find the most poisonous plant they can, and eat it to a level to poison that parasitoid and not kill itself. Once that parasitoid is killed, then it switches back to a more nutritious plant so it doesn't poison itself. So essentially chemotherapy. And then bats. Bats are well-known predators of a lot of different moths, and a lot of moth defenses, we're finding increasingly more amazing defenses that they have against bats. So bats, as we all probably know, use echolocation to find their prey. So they send out sound waves, they bounce off their prey, comes back, they pick it up in their ears. So they get this basically auditory picture of what's around them. So they can find moths in complete darkness. Now, a lot of moths, though, especially the bigger moths, have ears. And these ears are fine-tuned to pick up the echolocation calls of bats. So when they hear a bat, some moths, like this metallic looper, what they do is they take evasive maneuvers. So they'll duck into dense vegetation or go down to the ground. Some will fold their wings and just plummet from the sky. And if you ever want to see a moth ear, you can do it. This is a virgin tiger moth. I talked about the species earlier. To orientate you here, here's the head, there's the compound eye antenna, here's the thorax, here's the abdomen, and one leg here, one leg here, one leg here. And what I've done on this is I pulled the wing up. So here's the forewing, here's the hind wing. And underneath, you'll see this hole. That's its ear. Inside there, there's an eardrum, a tympanum that picks up the sounds of the bats, so it can hear them. And here's a view of the whole moth. This is the same specimen as earlier. And what's interesting with tiger moths is they just don't hear bats, but they also have defenses against bats. So when they hear a bat, what they do is they create their own sounds back. And in some species, this sound is a warning saying, hey, I'm poisonous. You don't want to eat me. You won't enjoy this. In other species, they actually jam the bat sonar. So they're sending signals out that interferes. So the bat, thinks it finds a moth, and all of a sudden there's this fuzzy mess, and it can't find where that moth is. And in some moths, there's actually some passive techniques that they use. So here's the Luna moth. This is a well sought after moth by many people, relatively common in the Finger Lakes area. And there's a study that came out, I think just 2 or 3 years ago, that showed that these tails on the moth serve to deflect the sonar of the bat. So it makes it harder for the bats to actually catch it. And they did experimental studies where if you cut the tails off, their success rate of getting away from bats really drops. So bats have a much easier time of getting them. And even micromoths have some interesting strategies for getting away from bats. And I say even micromoths because most micromoths are completely deaf. They cannot hear bats. Here's an example that this one was discovered just about 3 or 4 years ago. This is called an Ermine moth. And if you look at the coloration of it, you can say, yeah, that's clearly toxic. You don't want to eat that. And that is indeed the case. But again, you can't communicate that to a bat visually because they're using echolocation, and that does not pick up colors. So how do they do it? Well, they have this neat little structure called an aeroelastic timbal. And here is a picture of another Ermine moth. So here's the thorax, the abdomen, here's the forewing, and here's the hind wing. So it wouldn't be visible in the live one. And you'll notice this window in the wing here. And, I've seen this before, and I thought, whatever, it's a patch without scales. There's probably no reason for it. Well, there is a good reason. This is an aeroelastic timbal. And what it does, while it's in flight, it's constantly yelling, basically. So this aeroelastic timbal is vibrating. So picture taking like a piece of sheet metal and going, whoop, 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 whoop. That's basically what this is doing, but with finer ridges and creating sounds that actually mimic the calls of tiger moths. So they're yelling even if there's no bats around. And I thought, okay, that's cool. So we have one micromoth group that does this. It can't be that common. Turns out there's a study that I just found out about. A colleague of mine sent it to me on Monday, and it blew my mind because it turns out this is widespread in moths that don't have ears, where they have these aeroelastic timbals. So here's a moth. This is a type of fungus moth that's pretty common here, Monopus levicata. And I always thought, okay, they have this little spot here on the wing. Big deal. It's a spot. Part of camouflage, who knows? Well, it's another aeroelastic timbal. It actually vibrates like that. So this is another moth that's yelling at bats. The interesting thing, though, is that I have no reason to believe this moth is toxic. So it clearly relies on camouflage. We don't know yet if this is something that actually is toxic or if it's something that's just pretending to be toxic so bats avoid it. All right, so we've talked about some of the strategies that they have. Let's talk about how do they get together and create more moths. Well, typically what happens in most moths is the female sits up on a perch somewhere and hangs her abdomen down and drops what's called a pheromone. So basically she drops a pheromone, which is some volatile chemicals, often alcohols and aldehydes, that drop down, and then if it's a nice gentle breeze, it blows away. Then a male moth somewhere of the same species, his antennae are tuned to that precise proportion of chemicals and gets very excited when he smells it. And so if it's stronger in this antenna, the moth knows to fly this way. And then when he flies too far that way, it's stronger in this antenna, so it flies that way. So they eventually zigzag until they find that female. Now that's under ideal conditions. In fact, it's been estimated that some of these can actually find a female several kilometers away. I think that's probably exceptional. I think a kilometer is more reasonable, but think about that. How many people do you know that you can smell from a kilometer away? It's mind-blowing. Now, when the male does find the female, we actually don't know what most of them do. Well, of course they mate, but it's probably more elaborate than that. There are some species where we know the first male there is the one that mates. And that's probably the case for this big poplar sphinx. So what we got here on top is the female, on the bottom is the male, and if you'll notice, they're attached only by their genitalia. And this is a heavy moth. This is the heaviest moth we have in the finger legs. And when I've got one in my hand, you can feel it. So that just shows the power of the male genitalia to just grab onto the end of the female, and he can just hang there, no problem. But basically, who knows? Maybe this is the dominant situation in moths, but in most cases, we have no idea. In some, it's a little more elaborate. This is a moth called a fanfoot, and you can kind of see why. So this is a dead one that I flipped over. And so one thing I'll point out, this is a male. The male has these weird modifications of the antennae that probably have some sensory function, where maybe he strokes the female's antennae. In other species that have similar structures, that's what they do, but we don't know. And here's a typical leg of it. This is the middle leg. So it starts here, goes here, and goes down here, and the tip's down there. Whoops, not too far. But the forelegs are different. Look at this. Here's the base, and they've got these crazy, looks like feathered boots. These are modified scales. They probably secrete some sort of close-range pheromone. Then the leg goes here, and this wishbone-like structure is normally tucked into the leg and then pops out, probably, again, when he's trying to impress a female. So there's that big feather duster thing that pops out from the leg. And then the leg goes here, and you can see it better on the other leg, but there's this other series of modified scales over here that probably serve a similar function to secrete a different chemical to attract a female. And in this case, we just don't know how it works, but it's got to be crazy and complicated, probably pretty wild to watch. Here's another example. This is a fur coneworm, and again, another moth where if you just superficially look at it, it's like, okay, camouflage, that's nice. But if you look at the underside of the abdomen, just before the genitalia, like in the bottom right corner, you see this. And each species has a totally different arrangement of these modified scales. And what's interesting is that each of these bundles probably wicks a different volatile chemical out, and probably is a requirement in order for a female to choose to mate with them. And some have elaborate fleshy structures. These are called coromata, and you'll find them in a lot of our tiger moths, like in the top left is a delicate cycnia. The big photo here is one I took in Guatemala of a different type of tiger moth we don't have here, but you can see these weird tentacle-looking things sort of inflate out of the back end of the abdomen, and probably also secrete a close-range pheromone to attract the female. All right, so why are moths important? We've talked about their biologies. They're interesting in themselves, but not everybody is interested in insects. My job is to try to convince them why we should care about moths. Well, here's an example. This is a caterpillar called a leaf litter moth. And this, as the name suggests, feeds on leaf litter. Now, most of you might know that in New York State, we have no native earthworms. Prior to Europeans getting here, there were no earthworms here. They were all wiped out by the last glaciation. So what decomposed plant matter? Well, a whole bunch of other insects, and a large part of that, especially what we call the macro decomposers, was probably caterpillars. And these caterpillars live on the forest floor, and they eat just dead leaves. Now, what happens when we introduce earthworms? It probably changed things. We really don't know. We don't have the baseline data, but no doubt had some sort of effect. See, caterpillars in the forest floor. You also get some adult moths that are pollinators. Now, there is a lot of debate and also very little evidence about the effectiveness of moths as pollinators overall. There are some very clear examples of moths that are definitely pollinators. Here's one of them. This is called the Primrose Moth. This will be out in a few weeks, and it's very easy to find when you know how to find it. So first of all, it's very closely tied to the primrose plant. The caterpillar feeds on the seed pods of primrose. You'll see them late summer. They're really well camouflaged, but you see their head burrowed in there. It's pretty distinctive. But the adults will actually visit the flowers at night, because evening primrose typically opens at night, and it's pollinated by moths like this primrose moth. Now, why don't you usually see them? Because usually they're not sitting like this. Usually what happens, they sit in the flower, and then as the flower closes during the day, it closes around them, so just their butt sticks out of the flower. So you just see sort of this cream edge sticking up. So next time you're out and evening primrose is blooming, check the flowers. If it's closed up, you might see a moth butt inside of this really pretty common local moth. And then, of course, moths in all their stages are important food for other animals. That's abundantly clear. So many things out there trying to eat it, and so many things that obviously depend on them. But in the bigger scheme of things, they're also hugely important by sheer biomass. And what I mean by biomass is if you took all the animals in an area and put them in a pile, what relative portion of that pile would be one thing. So for instance, I really like this picture. This is from a trail guide from a park I used to work in Ontario called Algonquin Provincial Park. And this is the cover of one of their trails, their trail guides, that shows the relative biomass, above ground biomass of animals in a typical hardwood forest up there. And it'd be comparable to what's here. So first thing you'll notice is wolves are insignificant. Who cares? Bears, not important. Large ungulates, deer and moose, barely noticeable. Rodents, okay, there's a bunch more. Chipmunks, mice, they're up there. Salamanders, okay, salamanders are important. Birds, oh yeah, there's a bunch of birds. But most of the biomass, about 80% up there, is caterpillars and other insects, but mostly caterpillars. So they're really, really important. And they serve as sort of the base of the food web for a lot of animals. And it's not just them being important food, but they can change entire ecosystems. This is a photo I took in New Mexico, so obviously not the Finger Lakes, a few years back. This is in July in an aspen forest. This is not what an aspen forest looks like most years in July. It's got no leaves left. And to me, this is one of the most beautiful sights in nature. And I'm going to try to convince you why. So first of all, in this habitat, this is high elevation, northern New Mexico, trembling aspen is a superior competitor. It's dominant. You can see it just dominates the landscape. So what happens when you have a major outbreak, in this case, it was Western tent caterpillar, what it does, first of all, it doesn't kill that many trees. It weakens them. And over several years, it might kill some, but it will kill off seedlings, okay? But by opening up the canopy, now all of a sudden, other plant species that normally are not superior at competing have a chance. So here's a local example, eastern white pine, which does well when we have outbreaks of forest caterpillars in hardwood forests. And so first of all, it's getting abundant sunlight coming down because the canopy has been cleared out. It's got very few seedlings competing with it, so it's got an advantage there. But also, these plants get this constant rain of fertilizer. Here's caterpillar frassicing, caterpillar poop. So it's raining down entirely in the growing season when the plants can absorb it. And now they've got this abundant fertilizer. So you've got all these plants that are normally rare on the landscape that now have their chance to get a foothold. And so you can actually increase the diversity of a forest by having an insect outbreak. And then, of course, other animals. In hardwood forests, especially further north, there are certain insects that suddenly become absolutely abundant when you have an insect outbreak. So in northern hardwood forests, here's a prime example. When you've got something like a saddle prominent or a blue spanner outbreak, this beetle shows up. Typically, in most years, you see none. And then all of a sudden, an outbreak, you will see thousands of them. They lie dormant in the soil, and they'll sometimes sit there for 15, maybe 20, maybe longer years, sitting there waiting for an outbreak. When that outbreak happens, something triggers them to emerge, and they emerge en masse. They climb up trees, devour caterpillars, lay eggs, their larvae climb up trees, devour caterpillars. It's a whole thing. And they can be so abundant that I once found bear poop that was 100% shells from this species of beetle. So it's truly amazing the effect they can have on other predators. Things like birds too will sometimes have a second or even a third brood when there's an outbreak. So basically there's abundant food for a lot of things. All right, so hopefully I've made my case for how insect outbreaks can be beautiful. How do you attract moths to your backyard? Well, the first thing is turn on your porch light. That's the easiest way to do it. And you'll get some stuff. The broader the spectrum you light, the better. So if you have a mercury vapor light, you'll get a lot more. UV is always really good. So UV lights will attract stuff. So what I've got, this is my setup in my backyard. And what I've got is a mercury vapor light, which is the old style street light, which has a very broad spectrum over just a simple bed sheet. Now the bed sheet's there for two reasons. One, to help amplify that light at night, but also as a place for the moths to land. If you don't have that there, they're gonna land on trees and, well, you know how moth camouflage is, or vegetation. So get a nice big sheet and you'll have a nice surface for them to land on where you can see them. I also stretch the sheet out on the ground because a lot will land on the ground, and I'd rather not trample a lot of the moths that come into the light. So you can see the stuff down there. So now it's simple to attract them. Again, there's also a lot during the day too. So take a wander out during the day, put on your headlamp, go out at night, see what's at flowers. You know, there's so many ways to find moths. But if you wanted to increase the biomass or the diversity of moths in your yard, because it's a benefit to a lot of other wildlife as well, there's 3 easy things you can do. And the nice thing is that 2 of those involve doing no work. So it's really easy to do. The first one is shrink your lawn. This picture I took last year around this time. So there's that same moth sheet that I showed you right there in the center of the picture. Here's my existing lawn on the right. This part was a lawn a year before, and this was a lawn 2 years before. So you can see a difference here. And I've done nothing. I planted nothing. I just stopped mowing it. It saved me work, saved me gasoline, saved me putting more carbon into the atmosphere, and it created habitat, because lawns are terrible habitat for almost anything. There's just a few things that live in them. And the thing is, you don't have to get rid of your lawn. You know, I still have some lawn here. It's still useful. If you need a place for kids to play that's tick-free, a lawn's a good option. Or, you know, if you need a little sports field or a little walkway, great, have a lawn. But if you got a corner of your lawn that you never even set foot in, and the only thing you do there is drive your tractor mower over it, why? Why are you wasting your time? You could have nice habitat there. Just challenge yourself and let a little corner go and see what happens. Your results always won't be this nice, but they can be, and you can get some pretty impressive stuff after a few years. And I'm always dismayed. Around here, there's a lot of people that have these mega huge lawns with almost no trees in them, and it's just really disappointing. But hopefully we can change the culture. And here's actually a close-up of the 2-year lawn. So this was lawn 2 years ago. Again, I planted nothing. It was near a meadow, so it did have a good seed source. But about half these plants are native and great wildflowers. When I visit these during the day, they're full of all kinds of different pollinating insects. And again, from doing nothing. Now, the second thing I want to mention that you can do is plant native plants. Native plants typically harbor more native insects. And a lot of people will boast about planting things like forsythia, because like, hey, the deer don't eat it. But you know what? Nothing eats it. A lot of these non-native plants, if you plant periwinkle, nothing eats that. So what's the point of it? You might as well have a plastic plant there. It does the same thing. If you plant a native plant, you might have a whole lot of species feeding on it. So plant native plants. And the last thing, which takes no effort, just attitude change, is be cool with caterpillars. I've been getting into more and more fights with people online where if it's not a pollinator and it's eating plants, it needs to die now and kill it with fire. But they're so important to the environment. You know, they're moving so much biomass. So you have to accept the fact there will be caterpillars, they will be eating plants, and some plants might die. But if you have a healthy garden or a healthy yard, your plants will do just fine. You know, you have to be cool with caterpillars. So those are the 3 things you can do to increase the diversity and biomass in your yard. All right, so now I just want to talk a little bit about my research here. One of the projects I'm on with a colleague of mine, Hugh McGinnis, is trying to document the moth and butterfly diversity of New York State. The last time this has been thoroughly done was over 100 years ago. So it's due for a new list. And we've been breaking it down by ecoregion. And you can see some ecoregions have almost no collecting done and almost no observations. For instance, the far western corner here, the Western Allegheny Plateau, when we started this project, before I had done a bunch of trips here, the species list for this region was 60 something. It was, I think, 68 or 69, something like that. It was sad. So we've been boosting this up. Some areas are well collected, like around Ithaca, so that's a pretty good number, over 2,000 species. Long Island's pretty well represented, but other regions, we need more people out there taking pictures and collecting insects. Overall for the state, we have recorded just over 3,000 species, but we expect the true number to be about 4,000 species. So we have a long ways to go. So this is my plea for you as citizen scientists to please provide us data. And the easiest way to do this is to use iNaturalist. And some of you might be familiar with it. If you're not familiar with it, It's a little app. You can either use it on your computer or on your phone. And so here's me actually using iNaturalist. I took a moth on my sheet. This is a year ago. Photographed this moth, and it automatically imports the date, the location, etc. Okay, but let's say you don't know what it is. Well, the nice thing is the artificial intelligence will tell you, hey, we're pretty sure it's a Prolimicodes. And, you know, the skiff moth, Prolimicodes badia, has been seen nearby, and it's visually similar, and by golly, it's right. And so you can actually identify a lot of the moths and a lot of other wildlife that you see if you get a good picture of it. Plus, by putting this data online, it gives us data to use and scientists all over the world that we can use. And we've been using this to document new invasive species, endangered species, so it's just such a great treasure trove. So please do use iNaturalist if you haven't used it. And what you can do, you can also see what's in your area. So conveniently, the Finger Lakes Land Trust did a BioBlitz earlier this year. So they have a project where you can look at just all the land trust reserves. And what I did is I went to see what are the most common Lepidoptera you can get in the reserves. And here they are. So some of these you might have seen before, so you can quickly see like, oh yeah, that's the butterfly. It's common, that makes sense. But this is where I want to switch. So I'm gonna switch gears here and talk about the moth in the top left corner. And if you've spent any time in the Finger Lakes this season, you probably saw some of your oak trees look like this, or other species of trees where the canopy has just been thinned right out. And at the base of the trees, you might have seen tons of moths and eggs that look like this. Or if you run a light, this is my light a few weeks ago, where I had hundreds of this species. And this is the moth called Lymantria dispar. Now, there's a bit of a backstory here. I'm using the Latin name for it, the scientific name for it. The common name for it traditionally was Gypsy Moth. Now, there was a strong push recently to rename it because gypsy is a derogatory term in most circumstances. So it was decided we got to change this. So it's changed, but there is no current common name. So there's right now debate as to what name to use, but expect probably in the next few months we'll have a new name for it. My personal preference is to use a scientific name because it's not a difficult one. If you can say Tyrannosaurus rex, which is the scientific name and common name for the animal, you can say Lymantria dispar. So I'm going to call it Lymantria dispar for the rest of this talk. So let's tell you a little bit about it. So first of all, how do you identify it? Well, you can identify it pretty easily in every life stage. Here's the eggs. So on the right, you can see this is a typical egg mass. They're laid right now. I can see laying females out in my backyard. It's sort of towards the end of the season though. And it lasts all winter and it just sits there typically in tree trunks, the sides of houses, sides of vehicles, basically any solid structure. And here on the left is a female laying these eggs. And what she does, she glues her eggs to the substrate and then uses scales from her body to cover those eggs. And then those eggs sit through the winter, and in the spring you get hatched. So on the top left, you can see very young caterpillars that have just hatched. They're very tiny, very fuzzy. And this is the stage that does the most dispersal. These caterpillars are super light, they have super long hairs, and what they do is they'll get carried by winds and disperse around. So this is how they do most of their dispersal. They'll land hopefully on a tree that they can feed on, and they have preferences. They love oak trees. They definitely do really well in oak forests, but they can eat any kind of deciduous pretty much. Some really like to eat conifers, or even low shrubs and whatnot. But yeah, they're not very picky, but they do prefer oaks. Here's a fairly young larva. You can see it's getting a little bigger. At this stage, they aren't that distinctive, but one character to look for is these big bulges here near the head, these tubercles. We don't have many caterpillars that look like this, and they kind of have these red dots over an overall dark body, long hairs as well. And these hairs are irritating the sensitive skin, so you don't eat these caterpillars. And then here is a fully mature caterpillar, and they're pretty easy to recognize. We have nothing else here that looks like this. On the head will be two parallel bars that go down. It's sort of look like the slit pupils on a cat. They have these blue tubercles down the back that turn into red tubercles, these bumps, and their tufts of hair come out of them. And then overall, the body color is this mosaic of black and white. The caterpillar eats and grows and eventually turns into a pupa. The pupa, again, is very distinctive. It's got these little tufts of yellow hair on it, and it's pretty dark, and they spin this really loose cocoon around it. It's pretty tough silk, but it's very loose there. And you'll sometimes see the shed skin of the caterpillar attached on as well. And here we actually have a male and a female. Here's the male up here, female here. You'll notice the female is much bigger. And that's the case with most moths, is that the female is there to lay eggs. The male is just a sperm donor. That's all they're useful for. So it's the females that are important. So females often take longer to develop and emerge later. And then here's the adults. On the left, we have the female. The females can barely fly. They kind of just flutter on the ground. Most people say they can't fly. I've seen them barely take flight, but they're not dispersing. Typically what happens, they emerge from the pupa and they sit right there and they don't move. They produce their pheromones and the males come to them. The males can fly. Here's a male. I shrunk down this photo to make it roughly the relative size to the female. The males are quite a bit smaller, overall thinner body. But basically, there are moths that have this rough wing pattern, but once you get sort of an eye for what you're looking for, it's pretty distinctive. So females white with a few black squiggly marks, black legs, black antennae, males sort of brownish, big feathery antennae to smell the females. Now, what's interesting though is there's a lot of different things that can cause their population to crash. So you'll notice they're not here every year. This species was introduced in the 1800s in the Boston area. It's spread here. It's been here a number of years, but it's not every year that it's a problem. This year definitely is. Will their numbers crash next year? It's hard to say, but there's a bunch of factors involved. There's a whole lot of parasitoids that feed on them. In fact, this particular one, so this is a massive gypsy moth, or I'm slipping my old habit here, Lymantria dispar eggs, where we have a little tiny wasp called Ultronia Underwing. And just as an indication of how small this tiny wasp is, it's basically the size of one of the eggs, and those eggs are the size of a pinhead. So it's very, very small. And this past fall and early spring, I have never seen so many of these as ever before. So they were doing a number on them. So the numbers probably would have been even bigger this year if it wasn't for this. And watch for them this fall. You'll sometimes see them. The other thing you'll see is sometimes in the egg masses, you'll see these little cavities. That's where either an egg is hatched or an egg has collapsed and failed because it's been parasitized. Now, the thing that really has been nailing them, especially this year, is a fungus called Entomophaga mammigata. Mammigata is based on the Japanese name for this species, and it's a fungus from Asia that we actually tried to introduce numerous times in North America, and it just failed every time. And then suddenly it showed up here and just wiped out Lymantria dispar populations. If you look on tree trunks right now, you will see this. So this is one I photographed a few weeks ago in my backyard. You can see the caterpillar is basically just melted away. There's the head capsule. The fungus has just basically caused it to concave, and the fungal spores have dispersed out. I looked at this very same one last night, and then there's only some tufts of hair left in the head capsule. It's just basically melts the caterpillars. And this is what we think causes populations to crash at this time. It will really nail these populations, especially if you have a wet year. Will this cause our current population to crash? We'll have to wait and see. But in a wet year like this, that very well might be the case. So the question is, some of you might have, what do I do about this? Well, I'm going to give you a very unsatisfying answer. The short answer is, if it's a small tree like this or a seedling, pick off the caterpillars. You'll make a difference. If it's a forest situation or a big tree, forget it. Let it be. If the tree's healthy and the outbreak doesn't last several years, it'll lose its leaves, but it'll put another flush of growth out. The oaks are already reflushing out here. It's nature. Things are used to outbreaks. And as much as we don't like it, this is here for good. This is part of our nature now. We're going to have to live with it. If you want to actually do something in the forest system, like pick caterpillars, you're going to have no effect on the population. If you want to scrape egg masses and put them in soapy water, which is an effective way to do it on small trees, great. But in a forest situation, again, you're not affecting the population. You're only feeling good about what you're doing, but you're not actually doing anything. If you want to do something, you've got to use some heavy aerial spraying, and think of all the other things that you're going to take out with it. So you're doing probably way more damage than good. So unfortunately, my best answer is let them be. And if it satisfies to kill everyone you see, go for it. But on the scheme of things, you're not making a difference. It's the parasitoids and the fungi that are doing the work. All right, on that happy note, I just want to wrap up by saying we looked at what moths are today and some of the neat adaptations they have for feeding, like leaf mining. We looked at the gazillion different things out there trying to kill them. We looked at some of the defenses they have for, fighting a lot of these predators, and some of the creative ways that they make more moths, and the important impact they can have on entire ecosystems. And I hope you now have a great appreciation for the moths of the Finger Lakes area. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason.
Boy, I went long.
Take some questions. We've got some questions piled up here. Okay, is Colleen Wolpert is wondering, is box elder high in salt? The frass of Cecropia caterpillars eating it looked salty in your photo.
I don't know. Plant biochemistry is not a strength of mine. What I do know is that things like populus, so aspens and cottonwoods, tend to be lower in it. I think part of that is because they produce phenols, which the caterpillars have to fight off, and I think they use sodium for that. I don't know. I'd be surprised because something like a Cecropia moth does not feed as an adult, so they have no way to get additional salts.
Thank you.
Simon Wyatt is just saying he would like to see the lecture that your chemical plant defense slide is from. I don't know if
I think that was in a tropical field entomology course. So come to Costa Rica and be a student at Cornell, and I can talk your ear off about it.
Simon is also wondering why the caterpillars eat so much. Are they exceptionally inefficient at converting plant mass, and what selects toward being that way?
Yeah, I think you nailed it right there. Plants are not that nutritious. They're full of cellulose, which caterpillars can't digest. They're getting all kinds of other nutrients from it. So you do have to pass a lot of material through. The other thing, if you recall, when plants are producing toxins, the caterpillar has to expend energy to fight those toxins, which means it has to actually eat more. You might think, well, that's counterintuitive for the caterpillars to eat more, but the more it has to eat, the longer it's alive, and the more likely a predator or parasitoid or pathogen will get to it. So I think a combination of those factors is why they have to eat so much.
Okay, does Seek by iNaturalist upload data to iNaturalist? Is that a useful app? I guess that's a different app.
Seek is related to iNaturalist. I've never used it. I know it works really well. I suspect it probably does upload the data, but I don't know. That's something I'd have to look at.
Okay, so just to clarify, you were recommending iNaturalist, not Seek by iNaturalist.
If Seek uploads the data, great, use it, and or use both. But basically, iNaturalist can function as Seek does.
Okay. Annual population of Lymantria dispar appear to go in cycles year by year. What drives that?
So basically, I think it's mostly driven by the crashes because it takes a while to recover from the crash. And those crashes, at least now, are typically fed by the Entomophagum mimigata, the fungus. And that's probably tied to wet years. So we'll see what happens if this year's been great and wet. Maybe they'll crash after this. We don't know. But the other thing with other species, it's sometimes driven by the plants. So basically the plants get so pumped with defenses that the caterpillars have to move on or just don't do well. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of things that can drive caterpillar populations. But I think largely it's pathogens and parasites.
Mm-hmm. Do you know if it's true that sunbirds come further north to feed on Lymantria dispar?
I know anecdotally I can say that cuckoos show up in big numbers. And I wouldn't say further north. I'd say they're more nomadic and they show up where they are. There are other species that will push species further north. Things like spruce budworm, which down here doesn't outbreak so much. Further north in the boreal forest, they have major outbreaks. And so they cause certain things like evening grosbeak, Cape May warbler, Blackburnian warbler to just, move to that place and have multiple broods. In fact, the decline of evening grosbeak has been linked to aerial spraying of spruce budworm and knocking its population back.
Okay, is there a way to best attract various large silk moths at night, or large and silk moths at night, or besides the full sheet and full spectrum light setup?
So there's several ways. So some of the silk moths you can actually find during the day. Some things like Cecropia moths, if you get the right search image for it, you can sometimes find the females. How I find them is if you find cherry trees that are about 10, 15 feet tall and go through it during the day, you'll sometimes see the females sitting right on the edges, and you can find them that way. And once you find a female, if you put it in a cage, she's going to drop pheromones and you're going to have a dozen males come in. And so you'll get suddenly a lot of giant silk moths. And a lot of people do that. Lights work fairly well for most of them. But the thing to keep in mind is some species have certain times of night that they're flying. And sometimes it's different between the sexes. For giant silk moths overall here locally, I find you got to be up pretty late. Sort of 11 o'clock and later, between 11 and 2, I'd say, are peak for the ones I'm familiar with, which is always unfortunate because when I do these events in person, most people are done by about 10 and they're missing all the big stuff. Other ones fly early in the day and some are diurnal though. So yeah, I would try those techniques. The other thing too is you can search for the larvae or the pupae. So something like, again, Cecropia moth has a very distinct pupa. And if you scan with binoculars, you can sometimes see them from quite a distance. It's long and spindle shaped. It's about this big. And you can clip that, bring it in, and rear them out. So that's another way that you can find them.
Okay. I think this person is asking about iNaturalist. Is there a moth photographers group?
Yeah. So on the slide that I'm showing right now, the bottom one is Moth Photographers Group. There are field guides to moths that are good. But if you want the most comprehensive thing, the bottom left and the bottom right picture is from Moth Photographers Group, where you can actually select just New York State and pick the moth group, and it'll show you all the species we have here. And so you'll see their pictures of spread specimens. You can click on those, and it brings you to a page with unspread specimens, caterpillars, and whatnot, and gives you additional information, range maps. So it's a really useful tool. And again, iNaturalist works really well for identification. But yeah, Moth Photographers Group is a wonderful resource, and all moth people use it.
Okay, how can I attract hummingbird moths to my garden?
So whenever you're trying to target a specific species, first thing to check is what do the caterpillars eat? And so locally, we have two common species here. We've got snowberry clearwing and hummingbird clearwing. Snowberry clearwing, name suggests, feeds on snowberries. So if you've got snowberry Symphoracarpus alba, I think it might feed on other things as well. That's a first start. It needs a host plant. Hummingbird clearwing, it's on various native honeysuckles, I think. I'd have to check that in viburnums, maybe. Check on that. I could be wrong on that. So make sure you have the host plants, step one. Then step two, have flowers for them. They're not that picky. I get them on all kinds of different things. But yeah, those are the key things to attract them.
Okay, just a couple more. There's sometimes a push for aerial spraying of BT for Lymantria and forest tent caterpillars. The claim is it is species specific, but I believe it kills all larvae. But I had a tough time finding documents. Can you recommend studies or resources?
So BT is Bacillus Thoringiensis, which is a bacterium. And it's a natural bacterium. It occurs in nature. and it is an effective way to kill off certain species. So for Lymantria dispar, there's a variety called Bacillus Thoringiensis Kerstaki, BTK for short. And BTK, while it's not species specific, it's pretty close. It will kill a few other related species and some that are completely not related. But most species it leaves alone, and it doesn't target at all. So while it's not species specific, it's pretty close, and it's a heck of a lot better than using a broad spectrum insecticide. And now in some cases, is it worth spraying? Well, it all depends on the situation. If it's a really valuable tree that's stressed, that might be your best option. If it's a natural forest system, especially something like forest tank caterpillar, our forests are adapted to that species, and you're just doing it for cosmetic reasons. I would leave that alone. As far as what BT is sprayed on forest tank caterpillar, I'm not sure which species is used. And I don't know how specific it'll be, but typically BT is fairly specific to at least a certain group.
Okay, last question. Any tips for successfully hatching a Cecropia cocoon? I have a couple that seem to dry out before they hatch, even though one was left outside.
Yeah, so the cocoons for Cecropia are typically easily found in the winter, and the hard part is overwintering them. So the first thing you want to do is don't bring it indoors right away, because if you succeed in having it emerge, well, now you've got this moth in the middle of winter that's just going to flit around and die. So what I do, and I have the most success with, is if you've got like a shed or something that's somewhat sheltered out of the elements, put it in there. Just put it in like a little cage or something, or even a jar. It doesn't need much oxygen because they're not breathing much in the winter, and leave it out there. When you're ready for it to emerge, so it's starting to warm up in the spring, bring it inside and let it emerge. You can also do it in the refrigerator. Any insect that needs overwintering to survive doesn't need to be completely frozen. So refrigerator temperature is good enough, but again, you deal with problems of drying out. So yeah, I would just put it outside in a shed.
Okay, that looks like it, Jason.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much for inviting me. And hopefully next year we'll do this in person.
Yes, hopefully so. All right, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Have a good evening. Thanks, Jason.